Maybe.
Yeah, now.
Okay. Check. Let me just shut off the phone. I don't know who's on the phone. You guys on the phone? Which one? Okay. Okay. I'll continue. Okay, Poischim B'dvar Malchus. Today, of course, is a very auspicious day. Everyone knows that on Chav Ches Nissen, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin came to the United States after sitting in war-torn Europe for many years. And it took many months and many shtadlusen from different chassidim and different people to get the Rebbe out. And we know from many different stories how the Rebbe behaved when he was in Europe, in Mesiras Nefesh, the Torah, mitzvahs. Everyone knows the stories about the Esrig and about the matzah and the karpas, all the different things that the Rebbe did not change one iota in his anhoga just because he was under the Nazis or just because there was a war going on. And the Rebbe came to the United States, and from that day on, as it says in the Rishima, that then they started the America's Ilyana Chinuch and Machnisol and Kahos, and there was a new tnufa of what was going on in the United States when the Frierdiker Rebbe had come and said that America is nicht anders, and the Rebbe actually showed that even though the Frierdiker Rebbe said that America is nicht anders, but Lepoil, to bring it into Maaseh B'Poil, the Rebbe was the one who actually went ahead, and all the different peulas and all the different inyonim that went on from that day on, the Rebbe was heavily involved from beginning to end. And as a result of that, America, as the Frierdiker Rebbe said, began slowly to melt. There was a certain ice, there was a certain apathy. America, Yidden were Bechlal. You know, the whole system, people came from Europe, and as the story goes, that they threw the 1,000 tefillin into the ocean, and they came to America, and they thought, everybody can do whatever they want, and, you know, we're living in a different world. We have to become Americanized. We have to come in this melting pot. And the Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe together started moving the whole American Jewry in the right direction. And we reached such a stage in today's world that those of you who saw there's such a thing called the Pew, P-E-W, a Gallup poll that they made in the United States and amongst Yidden, and it said there that 21% of American Jewry has a shaykhus with Lubavitch. It's an unbelievable statistic. How the Uftu, the Shluchim, that the Rebbe Shluchim throughout the world, and the Rebbe took American Yungalite and send them to every corner of the globe. You see here, I'm speaking to you from Australia, where it was just getting light. The Alois HaShachar is just starting. And the Rebbe already, the Frierdiker Rebbe in Tovshin Beis already sent a letter to there was a Kehillah here called Beis Ephraim, which was made up of Yekesh Eden. And the Frierdiker Rebbe writes that he wants that they should think about Chinuch for the kindergarten and Cheder, etc., etc. And in Tovshin Vov, when the Tovshin Vov, Tovshin Zayin, when the Frierdiker Rebbe, through the Rebbe was the one, I think it was Matziyah, that my Shver, Rabbi Gronol of Hashem, should go to Australia. And he went for 6 months. He was married. And at that time, he was married already. He left his Kala of 6 months and went to Australia for 6 months. Just think about it for a moment. Take a light, an American young man who's 22 years old, sends him off to Australia without his wife for 6 months to go and to Zay Ruchnias and to make sure and to plant should be Ruchnias. And when he came, of course, the many different peulas that he did over here, to build the mikveh, etc., etc. But the Rebbe came to America, and as a result of that, things changed from beginning to end. And as Mr. Rader of Hashem used to say, that the Rebbe's canvas was the whole of the world. The Rebbe thought about every single Yid from Katzvi Teva, wherever you were and whoever you were, made no difference whatsoever. The Rebbe looked at you, as someone said yesterday in one of the Zoom Fabringans, not what you are. The Rebbe looked at your potential. The Rebbe looked at what the person can do, and we see how the Rebbe took people who, we see that they're not, they're not the biggest chassidim in the world, and the Rebbe gemacht, and they made them into individuals who are marish olamus, who are able to change situations. Nobody believed that you're going to change the world, and South America, and North America, and Australia, and Morocco, and Israel, and then who knows where. B'chol katzvi tevel, the Kumen Jungelite, who just had Mesiris Net, had regular, normal, gefolgt dem Rebbe, that if you listen to what the Rebbe says and you follow the directions and you follow instructions, then Baruch Hashem, the Rebbe helped and you're able to be Matzliach, and we see the Poel Mamish, the Atzloch of the Shluchim, Bechol Ha'olam Kuloi. And this was what the Rebbe started. Now, of course, everyone knows that when the Rebbe came to the United States, he was very, very interested in the young generation, and the kiruv that the Rebbe gave to younger Bochrim and to younger light was extraordinary. And this went on for many, many years, even, and of course, till after the years, that people, young individuals, could go over to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was so accessible. Any single person, I heard from my Shrem many times, that after davening Shabbos, people would go over to the Rebbe and ask him all kinds of shilas, and the Rebbe had time for everybody. The Rebbe made time and had time for every single individual. The Rebbe's sensitivity to each and every single one of us, to care for every single one of us, that you take every single person, whether the person is a greater Talmud Chacham or a lesser Talmud Chacham. But the Rebbe had time for everybody, and the Rebbe was sensitive to everybody. There's an unbelievable story, which of course many of you know, but I'm just saying it over the Teva saying it, that when I used to daven, I mean, those of us who had the schus of davening upstairs Mincha Ma'ariv for many, many years, and everyone knows that Rebbe used to come in for Mincha at 3:15. Now, something which I am a little bit of a hobby horse is to people should realize that the Rebbe was an unbelievable, punctual individual. One thing which none of the Lubavitchers so once Baruch Hashem Ba'uns, people don't know what it means to come on time, etc., etc. But by the Rebbe, he saw the exact opposite. The Rebbe told Label right after when Yud Shvat Tavshin Yud Aleph that you should come into me at 3:12 and bang on the door and tell me it's time for Mincha. So every day Label would do that, and within 3:15, Label would walk in, and he would usually look, while he was putting on his gartel, he would look at the clock to see what time it is. But the Rebbe, and the same thing by Ma'ariv, everything was punctual. The Rebbe didn't waste any time. It's a famous story with one of the Chevron in England, in Paris, when the Rebbe was in Paris once, he made an appointment to meet someone at 3:00. And as they were walking, it was about the Rebbe sees this guy, and it was about 5 to 3, and the guy says to the Rebbe, you know, there's still 5 minutes. Like the Rebbe, 5 minutes, and in 5 minutes you can build a whole world. That means the Rebbe looked at time. Every moment, every minute is important. Every minute. And the Rebbe Bechlal, in general, the concept of time. They tell a story. Nissim Mendel, who was the Rebbe's secretary for over 50 years, wants to go on holiday. And he went into the Rebbe and he mentioned the word holiday or vacation. And by the Rebbe, when he said the word holiday or vacation, that was exactly as the Rebbe said to him, there's so much work to do. How can anyone go on vacation? And we know that the Rebbe, different than all the Rebbe, never took a day, not a single day, even when the story goes, even when the Rebbe wasn't well in Tov Lamed Ches, and Label wanted to, to take half the letters and don't bring in all the letters. So the famous story that when Label went in and the Rebbe saw the pile, they got his suspicion that how come there's not more letters? And the Rebbe said, with the Shmina Atzeres and Simchas Torah, jetzt darf man gehen zurück arbeiten. So Label thought that, don't give the Rebbe the letters, we'll give only half. What's that? After the Shabbat, the Rebbe is supposed to be lying in bed and supposed to be taking it easy after such a heart attack. So the Rebbe noticed it immediately. The Rebbe was one of the individuals who noticed almost everything. There wasn't anything that he couldn't catch his eye. So Label said, the Rebbe said to him that I want to tell you a story. That when the Frierdiker Rebbe was not well in the years, in the last 12 years of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life, the Rebbe said once by Fabringen that the doctors couldn't understand how he survived because Begashmis, there was absolutely nothing running. So the Rebbe said, I was also like you, and I thought to myself, you know what? Why do I have to give the Frierdiker Rebbe all the letters in one shot? I'll make the load a bit lighter. I don't have to come and give every single minute, all the letters. So once the Frierdiker Rebbe said to me that, what is, and he realized that there's something funny going on. And the Rebbe said to me, what do you think? What am I here on this world for? I'm here that ich will turn out Teva Yidna, as a Yid bet me something. When a Jew comes ahead and asks me something, and I go and I help him. Does it the tachas was if we don't have their welt? You want to take that away from me? So the Rebbe said that, and even in the matzah, was that the doctors had asked that he shouldn't do anything. And just to mention another thing, we know that in the Rebbe's Torah, you find the Rebbe, as we had Yom a few days ago, that what's his kashrus? Everybody wants to be mekusha. Mekusha doesn't mean you wear basalino and certain clothing, and you do it. You put your gartel this way. You don't put that. That's not his kashrus. Hey, a person's supposed to do that. No one gets anything wrong with that. But that's not his kashrus. Is belima Torah shali. Did you learn my Torah? And the Rebbe Baruch Hashem left us unbelievable sichas and maimorim and igris and rishimes ma'anashir. If you take a look, there's poshet. There's not even 24 hours a day. If we would sit and learn all day, we still wouldn't be able to do it. But the Rebbe wants everybody can feel what he can do. And the Rambam said himself, he can do 3 programs, 3 programs. You want to do 1 period, do 1 period. But the Rebbe demanded and wanted from each and every single one of us that we actually go ahead and try the best to do as much as we can. So the story goes that in Tavshin Lamed Ches, so they had done the Rebbe was then magir the sichas every week, the sichas hashvui. So and before Yom Tov, the Rebbe had already done the Sicha of Breishis. So they were up to now the Sicha of Noach, and the Rebbe said that he wants to magir the Sicha. So the doctors told Label that nothing should go into the Rebbe's room after 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, he's got to finish up whatever they want to finish up, and by 10 o'clock, he wants the Rebbe, the light should be out, and the Rebbe should go to sleep. So Label, thinking 8:45, so they brought in those days, they had the Sichas came in what was called galleys, these long rolling papers that they used to print, and the Rebbe, they gave into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would magia on the actual paper all that different hagos. So Label thought of bringing these. The Sicha was Pashas Neach, the Sicha Pashas Neach, which is not a long Sicha. He will bring in the Sicha Pashas Neach, and he will leave it by the Rebbe and walk out. So 8:45, he takes in the Sicha, and the Rebbe will be Magir. So Label thought the Rebbe would be Magir the next day. It's 8:45 at night. You don't have to begin Magir the Sicha. Do it the next night. It was this gebrand. So the Rebbe, the Label took in the Sicha, plus a whole bunch of other letters, and he walked out. So the Bachim were, of course, watching outside during the night. So they saw the light was on 9:45, 11:45, 11:45, and then Label said, "Gechap." The Rebbe saw the Sicha, and right away he started Magir. And the Rebbe at 2:15 rang the bell and told Label, "No, the Sicha I was Magir. Now I can go and you can print it." So you see something unbelievable here. The Rebbe could have done it the next morning. No question about it. But the Rebbe needed to talk to Magir that second. But the word is the Rebbe knew and the Rebbe wanted that his Torah should go out l'Rabbim, and he had the time, and vice versa, he had the energy, and as a result of that, the Rebbe put himself out in an unbelievable level of Mesiras Nefesh to give us his Torah, v'nosan lonu es Torah soi, all that the Rebbe put in, and the koiches that the Rebbe put in his siches and his maimorim, and all the energy that was given for us. The Rebbe didn't need it. The Rebbe, as the Rebbe Ashab said, I can learn the Kudat Torah in my room and gash myself with Atzmas and so. But that's not the kavanah. The Rebbe, the kavanah was that you have to go and you have to spread it to others. You have to give it to others. If you know Aleph Beis, and the other guy knows only Aleph, you have a chiyuv to teach the guy the extra letter. That's why you were sent down in this world. And the Rebbe looked at every single person and knew that every single person has the koiches. Sometimes it's always like that. There's no question that there's a yetzer hara and there's a nefesh habamis, and as the Rebbe said in the first maimer, which the Rebbe spoke about, that the mehapich, the nefesh habamis, we have to do ourselves. Chabad doesn't rely on the Rabbeim that they're going to give us the way they're going to change our nefesh habamis. Everyone has his egen nefesh habamis, and every generation has his nefesh habamis, and the difference between is vikuvim all the time. It's not something new. As one guy told me here in Australia, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have one day of peace and quiet. He got that keirachas, he got that dosav aviram. Every day he had somebody else, and they made mushik tzoris. And Moshe Rabbeinu realized that that's the kavonas we got to get to his souls. The grace of Rosh Shvatim and everybody else who has different tainas, v'chula v'chula. But the kavonas you got to get to his soul. And as the Rebbetzin said, even when the Rebbe had his few hours of sleep every night, you could see the tension. And the Rebbe, given it was so in such a level that in order to bring Mashiach his whole being, every part of his Ramachei Vorah B'Shasag Yidin was specifically given over to this task. So we as Chassidim, who consider ourselves to be Chassidim and hope that we're Chassidim, and I'm a Kusharim, and as the famous story which is told, so I heard from my uncle Label, Olav Shalom, that the first, those of you remember, the first Farbrengen that Rebbe came down after the heart attack in Tov Shalom Ches was Yutis Kislev. We found out about it a few days before in England, I remember, and Baruch Hashem, we were happy that it was going to Farbrengen Yutis Kislev. But nobody knew how long the Farbrengen is going to be, etc., etc. Up until then, the Rebbe said the Sichas in his room. But later, eventually, Yutis Kislev, he came down to the Olam to Farbrengen. And the Farbrengen went for about 3 hours. And what was interesting, what I at least remember of the Farbrengen, is that when the Rebbe started, the Rebbe did not start, in an excitable way. We were very quiet, you could say. But as time went on, they got stronger and stronger. By the time the Rebbe finished, it was at full blast. It was an unbelievable geschmack of Farbrengen. It was unbelievable. And the doctor said that B'Shas Ma'aseh they were plotzing because they looked at the EKG, the thing that shephers the heart, and they saw that every Sikh Rebbe was jumping up and down, and then Dr. Weiss said he was going to tell the Rebbe to stop. Because at the end of the day, it was no good for his heart, it was no good for his whole health. How many weeks before did he have the attack? And it was a major, major attack, and the Rebbe's going to talk, and he's going to get excited, etc. Das Teugnish. But they saw, what are they going to do? They're going to tell the Rebbe. So the Rebbe, they Farbrengt for over 3 hours. And then one of the doctors went over to Label and said to Label, do you realize what happened tonight? So Label says, what do you mean? He says, the Rebbe is not obligated to Farbrengt for you guys. The Rebbe is obligated to make sure that his health is v'snaf zu sein. But what did he do? The Rebbe forgot about himself. Hifke nafshoy. The Rebbe was mafke himself totally. And he came out and he Farbrengt for you guys. He didn't need the Farbrengt. The Rebbe doesn't need the Farbrengt. The Rebbe is really what he is. But he did it because of you people. He did it because he cares for you people. Now the shaila is, do we reciprocate? Do we pay back that which the Rebbe does for us? Do we give the energy that the Rebbe puts into us and all the letters he sends us and all the yechidas and all the kontreisim he gives us? The Rebbe came out and gave his chassidim, his life, his limb, everything from beginning to end, and the Rebbe thought about every single individual. There's a Meredika Maisa which was told, it's printed already. Today, all the Maisas no one can say because you can say, I read it, it's printed, you have either this magazine or that magazine or this Rishima, that Rishima. But the Maisa is there was a guy in South America who had a problem, a medical problem, and it was Friday night. No, he knew he couldn't call up the Rebbe because at the end of the day, first of all, by him it was Shabbos, even though but whatever it is, he recognized that he could not get through to the Rebbe Friday night. And he had a major, major medical problem. And he thought to himself, the only way he's going to do is going to sit down, he's going to mitzayir himself, that he's writing a pigeon to the Rebbe. And that's what he did. And he looked at the clock, what time it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. And he was mitzayir himself and asked the Rebbe, etc., etc. After Shabbos, of course, he called up 770, and the medical problem was given a mamish. Things changed l'toiva in the most unbelievable manner. Unbelievable manner. So the Rebbe said to Chadakovim, he should find out from this younger man what time he was mitzayet himself or to them pigeon, this pigeon that he wrote to the Rebbe. So the younger man said to Chadakov, it was about exactly 2:30 or whatever it was. So the Rebbe told Chadakov to tell this younger man that B'Shas Ma'aseh, I was mekabel the pigeon. That means I ever thought about every single young man, there's not a single thing. I always tell the story that one of the years, the Rebbe came Rosh Hashanah morning to 770 late. Usually the Rebbe was always on time. So usually on a day like Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe would come in between 8 and 8:30. And one time the Rebbe came much, much later. I don't know exactly how long it was, but it was much, much later. And the Olam, the Rebbes are coming late Rosh Hashanah. It's unheard of. So the Poel, no one had the chutzpah to go and ask the Rebbe, why are you late? And Rebbe came to Shreng al-Zocher Shailas. So a few weeks later, someone went over to the Rebbetzin, was very makura to the Rebbetzin, and asked the Rebbetzin, the Rebbe came in Rosh Hashanah morning, unbelievably late, and it's a shtik ba'apel, the Rebbe should come late Rosh Hashanah. So she said, you're 100% right. And I'll tell you exactly what happened. As you all know, the till Tov Shin Chof, what year was it? Tov Shin Lamed. What am I talking about? Tov Shin Lamed Aleph. The Rebbe, all the meals of Yom Tov, Shana, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot ate by his mother-in-law. The Rebbe's in the Chamadina upstairs. And I was zeicher to be taka by a few of the Sidorim, and to see the Rebbe in the Sukkah once even. And the Rebbe ate by the meal upstairs Rosh Hashanah. And after the meal, we went home. The Rebbe took his mother home, and then he came home. No, I didn't think mother wasn't alive at the time. But he used to take his mother after the meal. He used to take his mother home also. He used to walk her back home. But after the meal, I went with the Rebbe. We went home, and I knew the Rebbe's not going to go to sleep on Rosh Hashanah. And the Rebbe sat down by a table downstairs, and he had his hand on his forehead, and he started to think about whatever the Rebbe thought about. And I went up to sleep, and I knew for a fact the Rebbe's not going to come to sleep on Rosh Hashanah. So I went to sleep. I get up in the morning. I walk down. The Rebbe is in exactly the same position as he was when I left him. And I walk down the stairs, and the Rebbe does not react. The Rebbe doesn't react. That means the Rebbe is in Eilam Esel Yenim, and it does not react in any way, form, or fashion. So I move around a few chairs to make a bit of noise, and then the Rebbe turns around to me and says, "What's the Zege? What time is it?" So I tell the Rebbe, "It's this and this time," and it was quite late, because I knew that the Rebbe, before he goes to 770, he makes achones, and then he learns, and this and that. So when I came down, because it was late, so his whole schedule was was pushed off. And that's why the Rebbe came late, because he started his whole achonis, the Rosh Hashanah, and all the inyonim, he started late because he was in Elam, that's whatever he was thinking about. This story was told over in 770, and Zalman Butman Olav Sholem, who was an alter chassid, was also a cousin of the Rebbe, said, "I don't see the big chiddush. I heard my own ears from the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's Rosh Hashanah by night. I sit down and I think about every Yid from one end of Russia to the other end of Russia. So if the Frierdiker Rebbe Rosh Hashanah had to only think about all Yidden from one end of Russia to the other end of Russia, Alachas Kama V'Kama, the Rebbe has got the whole world. It's not only Eretz Yisrael, he's got the whole world. He's got Eretz Yisrael in America and South America. And he thinks about every single Yid. He has to have it at that time. So that we see that the Rebbe's total care for each and every single one of us. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. And the Rebbe keeps in his mind. I remember once my father Vashom had a cataract operation. I wrote into the Rebbe a bracha, and we got a bracha from the Rebbe, Askelatzin, or wherever I got. And I forgot afterwards, as the Rebbe said many times, people are tzoros chassidim. Whenever it comes to write tzoros, they write in right away. But afterwards, when it comes, everything works out. I guess it's Eitzushaim. And I forgot to write to the Rebbe that Baruch Hashem, the operation was successful. My father got well, etc., etc. Months later, must have been at least 8 or 9 months later, I went into Yechidus for my birthday. And as I come in, the Rebbe looks at me and says, "Vos macht the Tatus oig? How's my father's eye?" And you think to yourself, you're talking about my father, one individual. And he said, "It's a Meiser operation, which was not, the most, it was a cataract operation." And Afa became the Rebbe gehalten in Kopf that this fellow had an operation, and was machte. So we see the Rebbe's level of sensitivity. Just one more story before I go on to the next inyan. So the Rebbe davened Mincha Ma'ariv upstairs in the Zal, and by Chazoros Hashatz, he would put the siddur in front of him, cover his eyes like with his forehead, look in the siddur, and then when Maidim, he would get up. So that all of a sudden, and the Rebbe did not change it, the way the hanhoga that it was by Mincha, the way he put on his gartel, the way davened was mamish, everything was mesuda the same way. Except sometimes, I remember there were times that you saw that the Rebbe got very emotional doing Chazor, doing the Shmoneseh. There was once a time there was a mice in Eretz Yisrael. I remember clearly there were a few soldiers who were never killed, and that Mincha, the Rebbe Tazige vein, Tazige clock was holding his siddur and shaking. You could see sometimes the Rebbe couldn't control. Most of the time the Rebbe was able to control his priyas, unbelievable. But you see that sometimes the Rebbe couldn't control it, and Posha the Rebbe geveint mitten davening was davening Shmoneseh. So the story goes that one time, when we see, so the Rebbe walked in, and we're starting to daven Mincha, and we see that the Rebbe is looking across from him. He's not covering his head with his hand, and he's just looking in front of him. And this went on for 3 or 4 weeks, and everybody was appelled. The Rebbe had a minig every time when he came to Mincha Chazos Hashatz, that he put his hand over his, over his eyes. And then all of a sudden, here the Rebbe looks, I was looking at across from him. And keiner hat sich nicht gehabt. Nobody understood what was going on. Lepoil, a few weeks later, went back to the original thing that the Rebbe started putting his hand on his forehead and looking in the Siddur for Chazos Hashatz. Until one guy chapzich, or found out about it. I don't remember how it reached us. But one guy chapzich, very simple, that at that time a bocher came from Eretz Yisrael, and the bocher had a terrible, on his face, either was burnt or whatever it is, a terrible scar on the front of his face. Now, if the bocher said, the Rebbe, we thought, the bocher who were then trying to figure out Das Alien, we thought ourselves that the Rebbe would have covered his hand within and not look at the bocher. The bocher would feel that the Rebbe doesn't want to look at the wound that this guy has on his face. So in order to the Rebbe made sure that he was open and could see everything. That chas v'sholem, the watchman called the Rebbe, the bocher should not feel that the Rebbe doesn't want to look because of his pain. Now you see the Rebbe in every single thing. There was a Ma'aseh Shahoya Khan in Australia that a certain person, I don't want to mention his name, was a singer, and he was coming to Australia for concerts, for this, for that. And he was a very, he was a questionable individual. Like even Abyssal, he did what he was, quite independent. So they asked the Rebbe what to do. Should let him into the Moiset, not let him into the Moiset, to give us concert, or to sing with the Chevre. So the Rebbe said they should not allow him into any Moiset of Lubavitch, to be mekarev him in a Neufim Proti, 100%, but that it shouldn't come from the Rebbe, that the Rebbe had said that they shouldn't let him in to the Moiset. Why? Because he'll have Agmas Nefesh. He'll have Agmas Nefesh. So you think to yourself, what's going on over here? The Rebbe is worried about that guy's Agmas Nefesh, because it's quite possible that guy will find out the Rebbe doesn't want him to come and he'll have Agmas Nefesh. So we see here the Rebbe's sensitivity on all in Yonim, the Rebbe's level of care for every single person, man, woman, child, to make no difference whatsoever. How the Rebbe thought, and that is what we have to, at the end of the day, one of the things, when we have the tzaddikim, chassidim have to be deimed to our Rebbe, that our level of sensitivity to care about every single yid and to worry about every single yid in every way, form, or fashion. Sometimes the other fella is nicht the größte tzaddik in the world. That's not your business. The business of Mebish's policeman. There's a Murray Dikamaisa told us in one of the Weinberg, Levi Weinberg, who's now in South Africa, wrote a duch to his father about what went on Tishrei here in Australia. A long duch, what happened at the tefillah, the droshes, the farbrengen, and he sent it to his father. He didn't think his father was going to do anything with it. And his father sent it into the Rebbe. His father sent it into the Rebbe without the knowledge of Levi. And the whole duch, which was quite a long duch, 25 pages or whatever it was, what did the Rebbe underline? The Rebbe underlined as follows. The minig was that they sold the aliyahs. So there was a very wonderful gvir, Heister Mendel Nuzo Zangesund, and he bought certain aliyahs. And he gave it to one of the, how would I call it, the poshtse balabatim in the whole shul. The guy was a barber. And I ish poshet be a wonderful yid, etc., etc. But it was an ish poshet be yese. And the Mendel knew was machabed this guy with the aliyah that he bought. And that the Rebbe underlined. What a ganz chiddush tishay mit gedaven to mit getoy. That the Rebbe, that's what has to be done. But with Mekarev and Aish Poshet and the Mechaber and Aliyah, Rebbe mit das given tire, which just shows us what does the Rebbe look for? That people should care about every single needs. That is what the Rebbe is all about. And everyone knows the famous story of Rabbi Pliskin was also an Australian. When he went into the Rebbe, so the Rebbe told me to go Fabreng in Newark. And Newark at that time was what Morristown is today. And he asked the Rebbe, wie soll man Fabreng? He said, Rebbe, tell me, tell Sipur. And then you Fabreng about it. And the Rebbe said, tell to Sipur wegen der Rabbeim. Tell Sipur wegen Chassidim. So right away, when Abba Pliskin heard this, he thought in his mind, what's coming to tell from the Rebbe's? What do you have to see them? So the Rebbe Weiss read his mind immediately and said, I've the Zelt, she put in the Rebbe's, came and said, Rebbe can do it. But we're not the Rebbe's. We're very, very simple individuals. And at the end of the day, we can't emulate and to be. But the Poyel, the Rebbe said, every person can be a chassid. I once heard from a Mendel Futterfass that he said, why did the Rebbe go and print over the Sefer of Isaac Homlish Ne'amoiris? Now they printed over the whole set. But in those years, learning Chassidus from not the Rebbe, Meisis Harav, Chesami B'Chosam, Kshemkei Godel, we never used to do that. No one ever thought about learning. You should say Lashon Hara about certain Elter Chassidim, but they learn about Beisel's Chassidus. That was the Lashon Hara. I've given Chassidim. So all of a sudden, the Rebbe goes and he prints the Shnei Amoiris, which is a sefer, which is not to be understood, whatever it is. Even that maybe the guys in Maskilim in London can understand it, but the guys over here in Australia, I don't think are up to that yet. But you ask yourself, why did the Rebbe go? And some men the said the Rebbe wanted to show you was ken a chosid ufton. Das was Rabbeim. Is Rabbeim? There's no question. There's a Nivra, there's a Beire, two separate worlds. But when you talk about Chassidim and you say, well, what am I able to do? So take a look. There's going to eat Yesem Beisel Homler and etc. Look where the guy reached. Look what happened to the person that he was able to go to him and tell him the massive that he could write such a sefer. Now we all know, and David Raskin fets sich stark kochen in them, that the Rebbe demanded two things. Number one, avoidei matzmoi. The Rebbe, of course, as we all know, did not want people to waste their time. You got 5 minutes, you got 10 minutes. So the Rebbe wanted avoidei matzmoi. And what does it mean, avoidei matzmoi? Avoidei matzmoi means very simply, medaf learning, or medaf davening, or medaf zayin chassidim. And as the Rebbe writes in the famous Sichen Tov Shchafei, that Shabbos in the morning, you put your talis over your head, whether the Bibles or may not do daven. Even you may not daven, maybe not shaykh to that, but your wife should maybe think that you're davening. The Rebbe wanted Chassidim, and the Rebbe was not mevater on a koitz shel yud, a minik kal shel diktuk shel divrei sofrim. There's a story that the Rebbe sent someone that Zevin Olav Shalom asked the Rebbe, what's the mocker, the minig, that when you sneeze, you grab your earlobe and you push it down and you say, L'shuoscha kivisi avaya. The minig bala, some say for time it's not so good because you may say it in mocker machine and toy. But whatever, the minig by Yidna, we do it. So he thought he was going to get an answer, Alom the Shar answer, api Kabbalah, api this, api that. So the Rebbe answered, Ma'aziyat me mein Bobbe geheißen. His Bobbe told him to do something, avada da mocker, etc., etc. But the Rebbe's dikto kalbe divrei sofrim, and push it into be medayik in every minig shel Yisrael and every halacha. And I just want to mention something which people forget about. Sidoha mitzvah Torah from kabedus avicha v'simech. Now the Gemara in Kedushin says exactly how you're supposed to do that. In the Yeshibim Koimah, Mechabdo, Mashkeu, Machileo, all the things that the Gemara says that what's the din of kibbut avein. However, and everybody is manazeh tut vasetut. If you take a look how the Rebbe was mechabed his mother, and you think to yourself, every single day of the year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shutis Kislev, even when the Rebbe sat shiva for his brother, every single day he went to visit his mother. Now, how many of us, not some people don't live in the same city as their mother, whatever it is, but if we ask ourselves, Midden Chassidim, and we have to follow, take a look, and the Rebbe was every single day, regardless of what the Rebbe was the busiest man in the world, the Rebbe went to visit his mother every single day. And she understood, she knew that the Rebbe was busy, and she knew that Rebbe had 1,000 things to do, and if he would have one day not come, I don't think she would have gotten, she wasn't that type of a lady. She was a very clever lady. She understood, and this I once heard from Beryl Unick, like an unbelievable story, that, the Rebbe's mother was an elderly lady. She wasn't young at the time. And the Rebbe came in every single day, which means every single day you have to be prepared almost. So Beryl says that there wasn't a single time that the Rebbe walked in that she wasn't dressed as if she was going out to the street. You can put a house coat on. You don't have to. Because he was a son of a Rebbe. It was her Rebbe. And he knew that he was a Rebbe. So his mother it was properly dressed every single time she knew that Rebbe was going to come, because Rebbe used to call that he's coming, that he shouldn't. I remember going to Gimel the first time I was in 770 by Fabrengus. I went to that Friday night. We went to the Rebbe's mother. So you see that the Rebbe's the inyan of Mekayim Zara Mitzvah, and everything that the Rebbe did, every nekuda of the Rebbe was oizgehalten api alochen and pshat the Rebbe and drusha. So sometimes we were able to figure it out, sometimes we weren't able to figure it out, and as a result of that, we Chassidim who Kavyochel have to realize that if the Rebbe does certain things, and and the Rebbe wanted that every single person should have a Avodat Tefillah and should have the Inyan of Limud Torah. And J.J. Hecht used to say, why did the Rebbe give us the Rambam and all these different limudim? Because he saw we have too much time on our hands. People have a lot of time. And the Rebbe said, you got to learn 3 prakim Rambam every day. Which you think about it, it isn't. It's the easiest thing in the world. You know, some people go to work a whole day, and and people have other kvias, and you got to give shiurim, etc., etc. And the Rebbe said, yeah, I want you should learn 3 prakim a day. And they say there's Salvation Zohar and Racha said he can only handle 1 parak a day. Because when he learns, he puts his heart and mind into it. And there were a certain bochum, we saw the Poyol said in Galai to Mamish, when they learned the Rambam, they put the heart and mind into learning the Rambam. And we saw the Rebbe himself carrying the Rambam when he went, etc., etc. And that's Avedim Zalah said, Avedis Hatfila, and Kim Hidu B'Tzitzis, and Hidu B'Tfilm. And the Rebbe's all the different Hidurim that the Rebbe did. And there's one story which Yael Khan tells, which is Mavil al Haraya, and if you think about it. Everyone knows in Kfar Chabad there's a matzah bakery, which was owned by Yossel Perman. And every year when he would come to 770, the Rebbe would give him a bottle of mashke. He used to come out to Sukkot, so the Rebbe gave out Keshel Bracha, so that he gave him a bottle of mashke. One year he went by the Rebbe, and he didn't give him the bottle. Didn't give him the bottle of mashke. So he was stark to bracha. Every year the Rebbe gives him the bottle of mashke, and then all of a sudden the Rebbe doesn't give. So he was like shattered, totally shattered. So the next day he wrote in, he said, "Vasa my pishi machatosi," that up until now, every time I walked into the Rebbe gave me a mashke, and now the Rebbe like completely ignored me. So the Rebbe said that, you know, the dinner, the Rebbe writes in Sefer Manhagim and other places that the Rebbe Nishma said, and I suppose all the Rebbeim before Rosh Hashanah, they accept upon themselves another hidur. So that year, the Rebbe said, "Aber getacht as a matzah, the matzah, and mashke, the chometz." So to mix the two together is like kedai. Now you ask yourself for a moment, what's hashayches? You talk about a guy's, this perman is getting mashke, motzi sukkis. The matzahs in Kfar Chabad, and they're making matzahs was a Pesach. What is the connection? But even bedakis between the mashke and the matzahs. And yet the Rebbe in his mind, what was the hidur? Not to mix even the machshove. And Rabbi Yael goes crazy. And then the Rebbe's mind, how the Rebbe thought, and how the Rebbe did things and everything. So there's Aveda Matzmai. The Rebbe wanted every person to be a chassid, that the Lubavitch is not changed. And as the famous Set Rebbe wrote, the Lubavitch has been standing for 100 and some 200 years, and we have this Kvuim Dike Zachen that we don't change, at every minute kal, and every diktu kal, and every mitzvah saseh, and every lois saseh. There's certain things are pastnish. The famous letter of the Frierdiker Rebbe is pastnish for a chassid. It's a pastnish for a chassid to behave that way. We have moedik in the I'm not in any way undermining the different nisyonis that we have today. And we're living in a very, very difficult generation. Very, very difficult. And the Rebbe knew they were living in a difficult generation. They was quite aware of everything that's happening. Tell a story. Moedik and my label once told me that one of his sons became a chassan. So there was a word. How much time do I have? I got to go down soon. Lately, Getzl, how much time do I have? Maybe that. So they made a word. So the next day when the label went into the Rebbe, so he said to the Rebbe that, so the Rebbe asked him, how was the word? I had a hein, fine. So the Rebbe said to him, no, the chasna gechazet a maimer. So the label said yes. So he asked him, what maimer did he chazer? So he said, he chazer a maimer from Tavshin Yutes. And he told him the name of the maimer, the davar maschel of the maimer. So the Rebbe said, I was chalange maimer. That means that this is in the Lameds. So the Rebbe remembered his memory was unbelievable. So the Avodah Matzmai means very simple. Every person has koiches, and every person has, as Steins als Tainis, the Rebbe gave him more work and more work and more work. There's no place in the bottle anymore. It didn't matter, no such thing. A person has unbelievable and untapped koiches, and we see this by being a light and by bochim, that they go out into the world, and all of a sudden they see the marish olamis. It's unbelievable. Some of them are not in any way, or form, or fashion compared to the Isaac Homlets of Hillel Parichet, no question about it. And yet they're doing gdolos v'niflois, because as Kushitzim Rebbe, the Rebbe gives koiches. The Rebbe is, and you see things today, that things are happening in Yonim, which are lamayla miderech hateva legamre, and we can see it, and the world sees it. For all kolam yards, we see what's happening. So there has to be Avodah Matzmai, no question about it. We have to be Chassidim, we have to learn Chassidus, and we have to daven, and we have to be Mekayim Mitzvahs Behidum. When the Rebbe gave the brachas, it was not words the Rebbe was throwing around. The Rebbe, every single word that the Rebbe said, every single thing that he said, and then it says, the Mittel Rebbe says that all of the Abayim, when they speak, it's Sirufi Shemes. Well, why did the Rebbe use certain language all the time? And people thought that he was repeating certain words because everything was Sirufi Shemes. And Rebbe doesn't talk stam. And there's a famous story with the Pnei Menachem of Ger, that the Rebbe, he was walking out one of the Yechidus, and he said to the Rebbe, that's when the Rebbe said they should go on Mivtzoim, so if people don't actually do exactly what the Rebbe wants, can zayin chas v'sholem a kpeder. So the Rebbe didn't bat an eyelash, and immediately said to him, that's why ich zog be'loshen hatzo'ah. That means the Rebbe was moided that if he says something, Rahman al-Tzai, you don't do it, it's a problem. And there's a story which I've told many, many times. Labels used to always, on Monday morning, when he used to go into the Rebbe used to ask him, did he hear anything from the Yechidus the night before? And Label used to go on and say, says, Label once told me that once he told the Rebbe that I was going to Poile She'id went in, and came out, he told Leibel, Chagezein, Riech HaKodesh b'michesh. I'm so Riech HaKodesh. Unbelievable. So the Rebbe picks up his head, looks at Leibel and says, on Yetzet the Folgen. And now he's going to listen. The Rebbe's not interested in people saying, Ruach HaKodesh. The famous clip where the Rebbe hadn't been by the Rebbe for 10, 15, 19 years. And the guy says to the Rebbe, what a moiridik zikaron you have. So what does the world get? What is Yiddishkeit going to get? I have a moiridik zikaron. The Rebbe wasn't interested in this and that. So there's Avodah Matzmai, that a person shouldn't forget Mipsorch Al Tisalim. And not only that, it's in one's children. The children see what the father does, and by him is tired Avot Chassidus, by him is tired Merem Sefer. And everybody knows, we're just finishing the year from Mulek Liberov, something which the Rebbe was unbelievable, and Omein and Nishredim Bam Dav, and all the different things that Chassidim have to behave like way. A Chassid is not just a regular Stam Sham Shapoznik. A Chassid is someone who has a Medayik in Shulchan Aruch. And a minyan is a minyan, and Omen Shmerabah is an Omen Yeshmerabah, and as a chosid b'chol ramachei vorav shasagido, and kashas is kashas, and no compromises, and there's a b'di'evet. Al misnagdim yed zach a b'di'evet. In a mutter, also mutter, hakum mutteram lo. That's what Chassidim are all about. Chassidim are all about mekayim and rots nabayir, mekayim and rots from the Meibish, and the Meibish wanted that as Ezam Zachfir and the Chassidim have to behave and have to be a dugmachai. The Rebbe said. He told him one of the light here, with the biggest hatzlacha became moifes or yisrael arabim. The people will look at you and sheishem shamayim isayv al yodecha. People actually see that as a fitz chayid, so therefore they want to be like them in the kiddush Hashem. That's number one. And number two, the second thing is avodah mazulas. You big people, you mekarev people, you let people into your home. And as a result of that, they can remember it, and you have an impact. We don't realize the impact that it has. We have no idea. Now, a Rav Lubavitcher Rav in England told me this famous story that there was a guy who later he went to Manchester, this Rav. And while he was sitting at a bar mitzvah in Manchester, a guy says to me, see that Jew across the street, across the Velenetsk table, with the device aboard, the Gelabor, whatever it is. I says, yeah. He says, that's one of your peiros. So the Rav looks at this other guy And he says, I don't know who the guy is. I can't recognize the guy. I don't know who the woman. I have no. What do you mean he's your payre? So he says, I'll tell you the story. This guy was completely not from. Aber in Kippur darf doch gehen in shul. So he was traveling near where your shul is. And he thought to himself, no, darf arang in shul. You got to have Yom Kippur. So he goes, and Yom Kippur night to the Kol Nidre, he went to the shul, not to shul. And he arranged with a ticket, whatever he had to do. Lepoil, he thought to himself, there's an appeal between Kol Nidre and Ma'ariv. They usually make an appeal. It's a soul or whatever it is. I can chap my guten dremel, what's wrong? Lepoil, he realized after they said Kol Nidre, that the Rav is going to get up to speak, and the appeal is going to be after the Rav's speech. The Rav read, can make sicher schlafen. When the Rav gets up to speak, so everyone can go to sleep. Why not? So the Rav got up, and he said, I started listening, and it made sense what the Rav said, and it gerät zu der Sach, and he hit me. And then I started thinking, the Rabbi's right, and slowly but surely, the more he spoke, the more I realized that Efshe darf man ohne trachten wegen Yiddishkeit. So that was the first catalyst that got me involved in Yiddishkeit. And from that day onwards, I went, so we don't know what words can have an impact. We have no idea. You say something, and you can never tell. You can never tell. When I used to go with Tali and Shmuel to different universities, so you ask yourself, we spoke to hundreds, maybe thousands of students. Now, you want to tell me that we made every single one should be a Shemet Torah mitzvahs? I'm not sure. Some Baruch Hashem, we did have Atzloch. We know for a fact there were many Baba Kiyayingelait and Bachim that became Chassidim. I used to sometimes think to myself, as long as I can make sure that this guy's on the Chasnam mit Hashiksa, mit an Arelis, I'd be happy. So at least a Chasnam Tayyidische. And then eventually, who knows what can happen? You gotta try something. But if it's Dvarim HaYotzim Alev and Chnosam Alev, you don't know what kind of pool you have. I remember in Project Return, when Shlomo Levine started Project Return, how many in the light and what impacted people. So I remember one guy who hadn't been there for many, many years, many months. He hadn't come. So when he walked into the door, so one of the guys that was there, one of the Lubavitchers that was there, called him by his first name. And the guy went bananas. So and the guy wasn't a fellow who was Mamash Unza Anashi, but a regular guy. And the guy should remember months later this guy's first name that made such an impact on this individual. V'chulu, v'chulu, there's mices in the millions like that. Aveda Mazulas means trachten wegen jenem, talk to a person, be there for a person, listen for a person. And to never think that you're not going to have a hatzlocha on the other individual. There's a beautiful story that Takesh Shlomo Kalbach tells that Tafshin Yud Beis or Tafshin Yud Aleph, whatever it was, he was going in a train going to New York. He lived in Manhattan. Those of you know, he lived in Manhattan. Those who know where Manhattan is, 78th Street and West End Avenue. It wasn't far from where I used to live. And he was going home, and all of a sudden he gets into the train. And he sees this guy sitting there in a zintzach, like he's in a good mood, in a happy mood. Don't forget, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. And he goes over to the guy. He sees the guy looks at him. Yid in New York, most people, 1 out of every 3 Yid people, he sees a guy, so he asks him, he says, what are you, he says, oh, I'm getting married next week. Oh, Mazel Tov. Is she Jewish? And the guy says, no, she's not really Jewish. So Shlomo says, Judaism, make a long story short, eventually Shlomo got him, said, you want to meet a rabbi of mine. Before you get married, it's a good idea, speak to a rabbi. Come, I'll take you to a rabbi and speak to him. They got off the train and they schlepped him to 770. And eventually Shlomo went into the Rebbe and told the Rebbe that this guy outside. And the Rebbe said, let him in. And Lepoil, he went to Yechidus. And he was there for quite a while. And when he came out, his face was red, geweint. And the Rebbe told him they should come later to Hakofis or to come to Tkiyas or whatever it is. What does that mean? There's no question the Rebbe's care and sensitivity to every single person can sign, as the guy writes in his book. The Rebbe asked Rabbi Siegel. Everyone knows Rabbi Siegel was a Rav in New York, New Jersey. And when he once went to Russia, he told the Rebbe that there's a certain Russian guy who was in Stalin's cabinet called Kaganovich. He can't get worse. He sent his brothers to the gulags. And the Rebbe said, because guys, you talk about the 1960s or whatever, 70s. And the Rebbe said, the Rebbe was like saying that you have to put on film with the guy. They say, you have a guy who's so vital. And the Rebbe didn't give up on him either. The Rebbe didn't give up on anybody. There was nobody the Rebbe gave up on. Everyone knows when there was a famous Israeli judge who came to Akofis. And he himself wrote that he was scared to come to 770 because the Chredim, you don't like a guy, you beat him up, it's Minig Yisrael. But he went. And the Rebbe was murdik mekarev to such an extent that when they got to Yisrael, the Litvish Rabbanan went bananas, they went crazy. How could the Rebbe be mekarev such a Pasha Yisrael? What happened was, the minute the guy came back to Yisrael, from that moment on, the guy did not say anything. He behaved as if totally changed. And when it came to his Levaya, he wrote at Savoy, Vila Mazon Mekav Zayin Keminig Yisrael, which means as follows: the Rebbe took every single Yid, consigned the Gres to Rosh, and the Rebbe was mekarim them and had time for them and spent time with them. So exactly that is what we have to do. We have to make sure that we have time for everybody and we talk to everybody and we care about everybody, and the other person sees if you care about him. And they don't, and it's not the pshat that you're going to get something out of it. And we have to try our best to use the koiches that we have. And one of the things, and I'll finish with this, but I got to go down shachas. One of the things we find, about the agolas. The Rebbe has a whole arichas about the agolas. Why did they have so few agolas? And they put one krushim on top of the other. They could have bought more agolas. How many? 4 agolas, whatever they have, 6 agolas, I think. And they put all the agolas, and all of the Russia Shvatim bought the agolas and whatever they were, and they put them, they crush them. Why didn't they buy plenty more agolas on these makamashiras? And then plenty to buy a few more wagons, agolas, no big deal. What's it the mice? And they so stark gekochten them. He said the Torah is telling you that we have to use our koiches till their nth degree. That means a person could have had, if you have a certain talent and you have certain koiches, and every person has, and the more, as Chassidus brings out, the more you have a muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. A person has koiches, and as the Rebbe says, a brenta fire. It's not the pshat that we have time. It's a brenta fire. Every time we miss out a yid, we don't know what can happen to that yid. And as Chunzer Abruder, as Damu Psori of Echod Lekulonu, we have to look at a Yid in a completely different way. The Rebbe taught us many different things, but one of the things the Rebbe told us is how you look at a Yid as a Chelek Elekami Mal Mamosh. And as the Mitzvah Rebbe says in one of his Maimorim, that why do we say that Bayis is Sheirishon, it's Chorev, Bayis Sheinem is Chorev, that Sin is Chinam. So how does Sin is Chinam is as bad as the first Beis HaMikdash that had Avodah Zorah, Shvichos Domim, and Gilad Rayis. But those are Yisem Misa. And sinas chinam was a lav efshir. So what is the Gemara? The reason why that? So Mittler Rebbe writes sinas chinam made us find the meibishten, because if the other yid is a chelik lekami mal mamosh, so then when the women has to find who are you hating? You're hating someone with meibishten. Does that mean the zora mamish? What's the difference? And that's what we have to know. And we have to guide it in the shoynes, and there's minis vikuvim, and there's excuses. All of these things, there's Hatzas HaYetzer, no question about it. That as the Rebbe said in the first Maimon Tov Shevalim, there's Al Baba Maises. We have to realize that the Eibusha gave us koiches, and the Rebbe gives us koiches. And if we follow exactly as the Rebbe demands of us, and not throwing in our own 2 cents, many times we tachten zu sich, we'll also do something. We have to. The Rebbe didn't budge from his principles, and he didn't budge from those of the state of and you can't make any compromise, and you can't come along. Avad, if a Rav tells you, if you ask the Rebbe, say Shaila Rav, and you ask an Erlich Rav, and the Rav knows what's going on. So there are certain times that you can sometimes do things which have to be alpidin anyway. There can't be any compromise. That'll be alpidin. So sometimes the pikuach nefesh at the end of the day is only from pikuach nefesh rativ in the fashion. Not everybody's going to make up his own thing. You know, and does a mutter, and Yeder Shliach does it, and then you have a tiny Yeder Shliach does it, and that doesn't mean anything. It means absolutely nothing. Everyone knows there's a certain Gabi in 770, what's like a shepherd with one of the Rabbonim, and he used to go up every Fabrenga to get dollars. And after he shepherded this Rav, he went over to the Rebbe, the next Fabrenga, and the Rebbe ignored him totally. Bifnei Am ve'edah. And he did it once and he did it twice, and he sees that the Rebbe is not responding. But it's a good shepherd with Nerov, and until this guy got up and was asked Mechila from Nerov Barabim, the Rebbe didn't touch, the Rebbe didn't do anything, but it didn't give his dollars. So we have to know that this is the avodah which each and every single one has, especially those who are young and those who have koiches. When you're young, there's no question that when we have the koiches and the world is ready to listen. Once upon a time, it wasn't so easy. Once upon a time, you had to argue. I remember when I first came to London, went out to universities, what were people worried about? The theory of evolution. The world is this million years. Today, no one gives two hoots about the evolution. So you're a dinosaur, so you're not a dinosaur, so your father was a monkey, wasn't a monkey. Cain and Ishton. There's the monkeys who get on, there's the dinosaurs who get on. Today, people are worried. First of all, everybody wants to have a good time. Nobody wants to have a bad time. People want to have a good time, and people are looking for teichen. People are looking for emes. People are looking to Vos, will the Rebishter, to have something in their lives to fill up, so the Rebishter help them. That since we have the Rebbe, and we see it every day, and every time you open a Sikha, and every time you learn a Maimer, every time you did anything, you see how the Rebbe is talking to you, the Rebbe is telling you, and it hits every now. There's plenty to learn, and there's plenty that has to be absorbed. Not always you get it absorbed, because sometimes, you know, the man is that sometimes it doesn't go in. And the Rebbe said things, and you ask yourself, how come the Rebbe repeated it so many times? And the answer is because he waited till it gets in. As Akiva said, the water gets even on a stone. And the Rebbe said it, and you ask, well, who's the Rebbe talking to? He's burning a maskil, and Chassidus says, he's burning a maskil. Who the Rebbeim talking? They're talking to us. They're talking to each Mechol, Echad Vechad Adiba Medaber. The Rebbe says, by Haktzina, I gave it to each and every single one of us. And everyone is an Olam Mole. Everybody's an Olam Mole. There's no question about it. The Rebbe looked at us that way, and we have to realize that's the Rebbe's shita. That's what the Rebbe wanted, and we have to follow exactly what the Rebbe said. And in them schus, if everybody does his avodah, and everybody has the level of Ahavas Yisrael, and everybody has the level of achrayas that the Rebbe put on each and every single shoulder, and told you, Goliath, listen, you have an achrayas. You weren't here. The world is not, just to hear a see. The world is to make this aldira leis barach b'tachteinim, and to realize Ashenu Matev Chalkenu Manoim Golei. Look out to the outside world, how they copy everything Lubavitch does, everything from beginning to end, because they realize that that's what the world is looking for, and that's what the world needs. All the Rebbe to help them, that each and sing a civil one. And I was telling a few days before Gimel Tammuz as Chemishkasha Zayin, with Leilona the Chayavis Dav zu sein, and learn Chassidus and Davanen and Mitzvahs and Maisim Tovim, and then all in Yonim and Miftsoim al Tzara Yeshet Tovim. The Ikas about Ahavas Yisrael, an unbelievable, unparalleled, without stop, day and night. There's one story I'll finish with. In the yeshiva we have here, yeshiva in Australia, as everybody knows, Yeshiva Gedela, and they were going to open a yeshiva in Sydney. So my uncle Label went into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says to him, call up your brother Yitzchak in Australia. This is when the yeshiva was being founded. So Label, Label is talking about Yeludisha like everybody else. So he says to the Rebbe, but he's sleeping, because Australia, as you see, is different. We're upside down. We're on the world, different world. So the Rebbe turns to Label and says, Vekemuf, wake him up. What does that mean? The Rebbe didn't want him to sleep. The Rebbe wanted him to sleep, no question about it. The Rebbe told him dozens of times to watch his brias. The word is the Rebbe wants to wake us up. We are most of the time half asleep. Nishmezet, we don't see. We're asleep. And when a person is asleep, all the keiches are there. Abba says, not. The Rebbe wants to wake us up, and as Yechna Gordon said, nicht schlaft, and nicht lost andere schlafen. Not the Rebbe sleeps, and not he lets other people sleep. The Rebbe wants us to wake up ourselves and to wake up the Eden, and to make sure that we know what we're here for and to do what we have to do. And that's chus. The Rebbe will certainly at Oishvin. As Perlov says, the Rebbe, and the Tzemach says, Chassidim used to winch themselves. That's what the Rebbe will. That which the Rebbe wants to get done will get done. The Eibshel health. Number one, we shouldn't be any minis v'ikuvim, and number two, we should be part in helping the Rebbe gets done what he wants done. And then schuzat mezeicha zayin to this galus from Malkeinu Melech HaMashiach and boine beis hamikdash b'meir b'yameinu mamash. Okay, wishing everyone a freilichen Chavches. We shall hear no absurd teves.